Sometimes confidence for an anxiously attached person seems almost impossible. After all, your attachment system is screaming at you all day long, making you doubt your every move and every thought. I mean, I would know. I used to live with it every day. And I'm talking about real anxious attachment style here, not somebody who has secure attachment style and is just experiencing some anxiety here and there. Real anxious attachment style can often be debilitating, and you really need to understand the difference. So, as I've mentioned in my past videos before, anxiously attached people are prone to something called negative affect. In psychology, negative affectivity or negative affect is a personality variable whereby you experience a lot of negative emotions and poor self-concept. Imagine trying to be self-confident with that as your inner template. So as simple as it may sound, the real pathway to confidence from anxious attachment is a deeper level of self-appreciation. Now, I'm not talking about positive thinking here or straight up narcissism. I'm talking about the ability to appreciate yourself, to appreciate your anxious attachment, and just to appreciate where you've actually come from. In other words, appreciating parts of yourself that you may not like. Here's the thing. Anxiously attached individuals prefer to push that anxiety down as far as possible just to avoid it and make it so that they can actually cope with the chronic anxiety. Now, that might be useful in the short term because it helps you avoid the terror of sinking into that negative effect and that anxiety. However, the real truth here is that it only takes you closer and closer to avoidant attachment style. Yes, that's avoidant attachment style. And avoidant attachment is never the answer. Instead, we actually need to move towards our anxiety and practice self-appreciation through that anxiety. That's the only true way to heal from anxious attachment style. So right now, I want you to have an image in your mind for our final goal. I want you to imagine yourself as somebody who's constantly walking beneath a dark, rainy cloud. I mean, this cloud follows you everywhere, and I've talked about this in my other videos as well. You just can't seem to escape it, even if you tried, because that's the inner template of anxious attachment style. Now imagine yourself walking every day with a bright and gentle sun hovering above your head. Now the trick here is replacing that dark rainy cloud with the gentle and warm sun that becomes a consistent source of warmth and, yes, vitamin D too. And you become that sun for yourself through the art of self-appreciation. That's the goal of this video. But first, we have to actually understand what it means to appreciate yourself in the context of being anxiously attached. Self-appreciation is not really a thing. It's not the default state when you have anxious attachment for two specific reasons. Number one is the experience of negative affect, which we briefly spoke about. And number two is because of the template of anxious attachment style, and this comes with every anxiously attached person, that says me negative, other positive. Me negative, other positive. We have to acknowledge that self-appreciation doesn't just come as a default with the territory of anxious attachment style. How do you actually appreciate yourself when your template of attachment keeps pulling you back to the equilibrium of me negative, other positive? You have to work with the wound itself. Here's what I mean by that. When you're anxiously attached, you have to imagine it as if it's a gaping wound on your leg. A lot of anxiously attached people prefer to just put a band-aid on the gaping wound as if that's going to work somehow, because if they don't, then they're constantly reminded of how that big gaping wound got there in the first place. And of course, that brings up all kinds of feelings like shame and horrible memories of being abandoned or just not feeling worthy of simple connection in life. It's very tempting to just slap that band-aid on because it helps you not think about it. But you actually need to heal that gaping wound by tending to it and understanding exactly what it needs without trying to avoid the pain, and address the wound in a holistic way so that it not only heals, but it doesn't succumb to the extra threats of infections or other assaults from your immediate environment. So how do we anxiously attached people actually cultivate that strength of confidence that not only just comes for an hour or a day, but lasts long term? There are two specific ways. Number one is to appreciate your anxious attachment style first. That's right, appreciate your anxious attachment style first. And number two, you do it by not expecting yourself to be perfect. Let's talk about number one first. I guarantee you, as an anxiously attached person, you don't appreciate yourself enough. You don't appreciate where you've come from, you don't appreciate any progress you've made, and therefore you can't actually develop confidence and self-appreciation because any attempt at becoming more confident is superficial. You have to dig deep. Also know that your anxious attachment, as maladaptive as it may seem, actually has good intent behind it. So don't berate yourself for being anxiously attached, because all that's going to do is double down on that negative effect and negative self-concept, okay? See what I mean by working with your anxious attachment style? You have to look deeply into into that wound and work with it. Otherwise, you're working against it and you'll constantly just be trying to put band-aids on top of it and ignore the real wound and what it actually needs. Let's look at number 2 now, which is not expecting yourself to be perfect. How do you not expect yourself to be perfect? Well, adjust your expectations. Why? Because it's your expectations that shape the meaning that you take out of things. And the meaning that you take out of your anxious attachment and the patterns that you have around relationships and intimacy is everything. It's everything to how well you're able to heal from anxious attachment. If you expect yourself to act like a securely attached person, then you're going to get a very poor meaning out of any of the mistakes that you make and even out of all the positive things that you do. Nothing is ever going to be enough. And the last thing I want for you is to get bogged down even further in that negative effect. So please don't expect yourself just to act like a securely attached person today. I'm sorry to say, that's not how it works. I know that a lot of the internet will try to make you think that's how it works. They'll say, just go and focus on yourself. And they'll say, just let it go. Just stop giving an F. But if things like that were to work on anxious attachment style, then what the hell was secure attachment really worth? That kind of stuff just doesn't work on anxiously attached people. If instead you actually expect yourself to still be anxious and maybe fearful when you're triggered, then you're actually able to intersect it and manage it a lot better, helping yourself become more secure because you're not wasting all that energy on trying to push it down and trying to seem perfect, even to yourself. So if instead you still expect yourself to feel anxiety and fear when you're triggered, that actually helps you heal from anxious attachment and become more self-confident because you're not wasting all your extra energy trying to push down that anxiety and pretend it's not there. Instead, you can spend your valuable energy on intercepting that anxiety, that worry, that fear, or use strategies that I talk about a lot on my blog and videos like anchors for secure attachment. These things will actually help you move through your anxious attachment faster, bring down those stress levels faster, and it'll allow you to get to that state of earned secure attachment a lot quicker. So as I've mentioned before, I'm roughly 80% healed from my anxious attachment at this point, from my very subjective point of view, but there are times where I still get caught off guard and that anxious attachment just shows up. And the anxious attachment patterns can show up when I least expect them to. Like recently, for example, I was caught completely off guard. We've been staying in an Airbnb in Vietnam, and suddenly the fire alarm goes off. And initially I wasn't too alarmed because it kind of sounded like it was in the distance. And then the fire alarm stopped completely. So I was like, okay, cool. But then a second fire alarm sounded much louder than the first. And now it sounded like it was coming from our floor. Now, for some context, Vietnam is known for buildings burning down. And fire safety is a real concern here in Vietnam, especially because of the hot weather and because of building codes and stuff like that. So knowing that, my stress levels went up instantly. And having 3 young kids, I wasn't about to see them die in a fire in the building. So in true anxious attachment style, I yelled at everyone to get out of the apartment immediately. By the way, half of my kids weren't even wearing any underwear at that time, but I did not care. I flung open the door and I made eye contact with this cleaning lady who was so calm, just casually mopping the floor, and she gave me a smile, and I could still hear that loud ass fire alarm sounding on our level above my head. So the cleaning lady smiles at me, and then I pause and I'm like, wait a minute, why is she so relaxed? Why is she casually mopping the floor like nothing's wrong? She smiled at me, I smiled back, and 5 seconds later, a loud message was broadcasted throughout the building. This is a test. Please do not evacuate. I repeat, this is a test. Please do not evacuate. So I turn around, close the door, and I find David just casually laughing at me playfully. The more I saw David laugh, David's my husband, by the way, the worse I felt about myself. Because I'm sensitive, and even though he didn't mean anything by it, I felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb, and I ought to be embarrassed for acting like there was a complete emergency when there was none. I was interpreting his actions as if I was broken, unfixable, and just hopeless. But the problem with that is that it perpetuates shame. And if you've read any of my articles in the past, I often say that behind anxious attachment is the feeling of shame. Because we weren't responded to reliably as babies and toddlers, we learned that our needs for nurturing and connection are not going to be met. And because they're not going to be met, we automatically interpret that as a signal of our low worth, or that we're just unworthy of love. And so this dark cloud that follows us anxiously attached people everywhere is often perpetuated by shame. And that's kind of what I sunk back into for a few minutes. Going back to what I was saying before, a lot of us anxiously attached people, we expect ourselves to be completely perfect. We want to hide that anxiousness. We want to push it down as far as it can go because we really don't want to be revealed for this helplessness and for this overactive nervous system that we have. A lot of the times, us anxiously attached people try really hard to push down that anxiousness and to stay in control because we know that if we don't try to stay in control, then there's a chance we might be revealed to ourselves or others for the extreme anxiety that we actually experience day to day. But this strong desire to be in control, which I'm sure you relate to if you're anxiously attached, it's actually counterproductive to healing. So going back to step number 2 about adjusting your expectations, you have to remember you should not expect yourself to be anything more than anxiously attached. And I know that sounds really negative, and I don't want you to think that I'm trying to make your anxious attachment style worse. All I'm trying to do is to get you to appreciate what it's trying to do for you. It may be maladaptive, but it was the best attachment template that you could have developed given your early circumstances as a baby and toddler. So you must remember that and expect yourself to have moments of anxiety, to have moments of being triggered, and to have moments of being hyper-vigilant and expecting and responding to threats that don't even exist. So instead, here's a couple of questions you can ask yourself. Do you expect yourself to be any different than anxiously attached? Would you expect anyone who went through what you went through to be any different? If not, then why put such an expectation upon yourself? Isn't that just more of a burden on your shoulders on top of anxious attachment? Now, I'm not trying to help you justify constant anxiety here. I'm trying to suggest to you that your expectations for your own behavior shape the meaning that you place on your actions in your relationships. For example, if you try to hide those maladaptive coping mechanisms, or if you try to expect yourself to be perfect, then you only perpetuate that cycle of shame. Shame is the biggest secret of those with anxious attachment style. And of course, anxiously attached people experience way too much shame. So anything that perpetuates that shame and makes it stronger is actually counterproductive to your healing. Of course, in some contexts in human life, shame is justified, or at least calibrated shame is useful. For example, if you deliberately go out to harm someone, do you think that a little shame might help you adjust that behavior and just to treat people better? Maybe it would, right? But you've got to remember that with anxious attachment, that shame is magnified because you never received that nurturing as a baby and a toddler. And so that shame, unfortunately, is hidden in that dark cloud and it follows you everywhere. So we counter it and we build self-confidence by appreciating yourself and appreciating your anxious attachment just for trying to do the best for you. Would you agree that having shame for desiring intimacy and closeness as a baby and never ultimately receiving it is not actually deserving of shame? I don't think so. So what we have to do is free you from the chronic shame. So here's what we're going to do. Get out a journal and write this down. Your job is to remind yourself when you have those anxious attachment patterns and your stress levels go from 0 to 100 at breakneck speed, that your anxious attachment style was actually the best adaptation to your environment when you were a baby. Remind yourself that this was the best adaptation to life that was available to you, given the inconsistent nurturing that you received in your first 1 to 3 years. Here's what I mean by that. So even though your anxious attachment is a maladaptive response to stress, it's actually just an attempt to secure your own emotional safety and to protect your relationships because they meant so much to you. It's certainly a lot better and more manageable than if you had gone to the I think it's this side, the extreme end of avoidant attachment style. And I'll put my sliding scale up on the screen so you can see what I mean. So secure is here, avoidant is here. It's actually a really good thing that you didn't go all the way to avoidant, where you completely and absolutely lost all trust in humans and in life in general, so much so that you've built this fake bubble to mimic secure attachment. Now, I have said before that the more anxious you are, the more likely you are to go to avoidant attachment patterns. But if you're majority anxiously attached, this is actually a good thing. And you should really appreciate it within yourself, because if you don't, then that part of you will never feel truly heard. But of course, we don't want to go around making avoidance wrong here. All we want to do is to appreciate your nervous system for adjusting to the environment that it was thrown into. So, don't expect yourself to never be anxious. Don't expect yourself to never have hiccups. And don't expect yourself to never feel so much fear that you blow things out of proportion. Look, I know it's not nice to hear, but this is what anxious attachment is. You can't heal it by ignoring it or making it wrong. Remember my analogy of the gaping wound? You can't just slap a band-aid on it and expect it to heal. If you expect this clinging and hypervigilance to be a part of your inner working template, then every time you have a setback, you can actually become more aware and you can actually help yourself manage it a lot better. Instead of hiding shame and expecting perfection from a naturally imperfect being, here's what you say. Hey, I'm exactly who I am and who anyone else would be given my circumstances. This might mean that I do things I don't like and that other people don't like every now and then. But I will first appreciate my anxious attachment for being there for me and for doing its best for me. Then I will consciously manage my anxious attachment by bringing down my stress levels from 100 to 95 and from 95 to 90 and from 85 to 80 and so on and so on. So forgive yourself for experiencing the stress. And yes, forgive yourself even for the toxicity that sometimes comes through when you're feeling that stress. Know that you didn't know any better at the time, but that now that you're more aware, it's your responsibility to bring more peace to yourself and consequently to the people that you relate to every single day. Now remember, this is not some delusional thinking such as my anxious attachment is a special power that other people do not have. That's just a little delusional and upside down. And I feel like the world is enough upside down right now, don't you? We don't want to add to that by just glorifying anxious attachment and being delusional about it. No, what we're aiming for is to accept it as it is and not expect yourself to have 100% secure attachment today. Because let's be real, your parents or your caregivers just didn't have the emotional or financial or physical resources to give you that hypersensitive nurturing. And because of that, you are where you are right now. And as an adult, your best bet is to work with it, understand it, appreciate it, and move forward from there. Remember this. The more you appreciate your anxious attachment style, the more energy you have available for gaining earned secure attachment. And the reason for that is because you're not spending all your metabolic energy trying to push down and hide that anxiety and that shame and the hypervigilance and the stress. So our job is to let go of all the expectations to be perfect and to look a certain way, and instead just appreciate the anxious attachment for being there. As we appreciate it and expect ourselves to sometimes mess up, or even often mess up, we become more aware and more able to manage our anxious attachment. Now, before you go, I recommend you watch this video on why it's impossible to detach when you're anxious. That will help you understand your anxious attachment style even more. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in my next one.